Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. I hope you all found this place easily and got a good parking spot. My name is Rhoda Sharma, and I'm the chairperson of North Jersey Public Policy Network. And thank you so much. And I'm welcoming you on behalf of NJPPN and also the Institute for Sustainable Enterprise, which is co-sponsoring this with us, and we are just so thrilled to be working with them. As I look around and see your faces, I notice that there's many that I'm very familiar with. Thank you for coming again. But then there are new faces here who may not be at all familiar with NJPPN, so I'm going to take a couple of seconds, maybe minutes, to tell you who we are. We're a nonprofit, we're nonpartisan, we're a volunteer network, and we are a 501c3 tax-exempt group. Our purpose is to bring programs such as this nature to you tonight, quality programs with authoritative speakers, experts in their area, so that we can find out and get as much credible information on important current public policy issues. We're hoping that people will pay attention, listen to our speakers, we have a great one tonight, and to have good discussion and dialogue. We really love our question and answer sessions, and we hope that more and more of you will become civically engaged. So that's the story of NJPPN. I am told I should make a couple of announcements because we have two incredibly good programs coming up in the next 2 months. One of them will take on the subject of money influence on our democracy. We will be having John Nichols, who is a noted author and prize-winning journalist who's recently published the book Dollarocracy, and he will be talking about money and the media, which he calls the new military-industrial complex. So we have to hear from him, see what he has to say, and that will be next month on March 20th. Hope to see many of your faces here again. And then in April, we're having a really fun night. Not that serious. We want to do a tribute to Pete Seeger. So we are going to have a musical program on April 17th, and we will be doing a tribute to Pete Seeger, and we will be having 3 musicians who have known him and know his music very well. So there'll be banjos, and there'll be guitars, and there'll be good singing, and we're counting on a sing-along from everybody who does show up. So that should be a really good night. And if you would, go to our website, northjerseypublicpolicy.org, and you can find out more about us there and also keep current on some of our programs. And if you did sign our mailing lists out here, you can get announcements about future programs through our email list. There's one more thing that I'm supposed to say to you, or everybody will be angry with me, and that is that we need your support. So if you haven't already contributed something to our little bottle, I never know what's out there, I hope on the way out that you would be very generous and help us continue to keep our programs going. And now I'd like to introduce you to Gina Wurtenberg. Gina is the co-founder of the ISE, the Institute for Sustainable Enterprise. She is also the senior advisor to the Institute for Sustainable Enterprise and CEO of Transitioning to Green and the executive director of the Transitioning to Green Foundation. And she has a ton of other things. I had to shorten her bio. It was like this long. She's very involved. And she just published her new book, and the profits are being donated to Transitioning to Green Foundation. And you will note on the table outside that her books are for sale. While I'm talking about books for sale, I forgot to mention, we have 2 books left by Jim Hansen. So if anybody's interested in those books, they're available also. Gina helps companies and organizations make sustainability a mainstream, routine business practice She's an expert on the leadership, organizational dynamics, and psychology required to make that happen. So, just before I have Gina come up, I do want to tell you that our moderator for this evening is Harriet Sugarman, who I want to thank for doing a good job with her team on this program. There are many others who really worked hard on this program. Rosemary Drager Carey is one, and there are others. I want to thank them all. Harriet happens to be on the steering committee of North Jersey Public Policy Network, but you probably know her best from Climate Mama. She's the executive director of Climate Mama. But so before we turn the program over to Harriet, Gina, please come up and take a bow.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to say, first of all, the team that put this together was such an incredibly collaborative and wonderful experience throughout the entire process. I wanted to say I'm very excited and grateful to see such a wonderful turnout for this fantastic evening. And I'm here on behalf of the Institute for Sustainable Enterprise in the Silberman College of Business at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and we want to welcome you all here. This is the first time we've officially collaborated with one of the NJPPN events, and I see this as the beginning of a long and powerful partnership, so we're really thrilled. And I just want to say that I see a real possibility for tonight can make a meaningful, tangible, and perhaps seminal difference in the world, and we are all here to support that in any way we can. So have a great evening, and thank you.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Gina and Rhoda. I'm so happy to welcome you all here again for NJPPN, and that we've been able to bring to North Jersey so many experts on climate change. We had Jim Hansen, we had Kevin Trenberth, world-renowned climate scientists, and we are thrilled today to be able to have and continue our learning experience on climate change through climate communication. So we're taking it a step down the road. We hope that those of you that were able to be here and learn a lot about the science on climate change are now able to move forward on how do we communicate some of that science that we've learned. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce our distinguished expert and our panelists tonight, and they're going to help us drill down not only on how and why people think and act a certain way, but also helping us interpret the facts on climate change. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Geoff Feinberg to you, who's the research director of the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication. Geoff specializes in discovering through survey research and other methods how people across social, educational, and political segments think about climate change and sustainability. Geoff and his team use this knowledge to help design messaging platforms and effectively encourage environmentally sustainable attitudes and behaviors. Prior to joining Yale, Geoff was a vice president at GfK North America, a very large marketing research firm where he specialized in public opinion, thought leadership, social marketing, and strategic communications research. At GfK, Geoff also co-founded and was the GfK director of the Associated Press GfK poll, which covered a range of current political and social topics, and is one of the most widely reported media polls in the world. And I was amazed at this personally, reaching upwards of an estimated 2 billion people monthly. So, and in the environmental arena, Geoff served as a research consultant to the Sustaining Family Forest Initiative. He also conducted national polls on environmental topics for Yale and Stanford. He's long been active in the research community, serving on the executive council of the New York chapter of the American Association for Public Opinion Research as its president, vice president, past president, program chair, and secretary treasurer. He received its Distinguished Service Award in 2007 and was recently elected as its counselor at large. Geoff grew up in Kent, Ohio, and was educated at Kent State and Dartmouth College. Next to Geoff, I have Lindsay, but that's not Lindsay right there. I have Monica. Monica Sharma is the Director of Creative Marketing at Climate Nexus. And Monica has extensive media and communications experience, both with traditional media outlets and new media applications. Monica oversees digital strategy and branding for Climate Nexus, and she's going to tell you more about Climate Nexus when we get started. But prior to joining Climate Nexus, Monica was at MTV Networks, where she managed multiple issue-focused doing good campaigns across MTV's various media platforms. Monica was also on the social innovation team at Weber Shandwick, where she was responsible for brainstorming and pitching sustainability ideas to corporate clients. She's a native New Yorker and is a graduate of Duke and Columbia. Next to Monica, we have Lindsay Smithson-Stanley, who is the Director of Media Strategy at Climate Nexus. She writes and does research for partners as well as original Climate Nexus projects, including media relations, materials, reports, and editorial content. Lindsay also provides messaging and framing support to help a range of voices, from scientists to hunters and religious leaders, a full range, sharpening and widening the reach of their climate change stories. She has a master's from the University of North Carolina, which includes quantitative and qualitative analysis of environmental journalism, as well as on-the-ground work with North Carolina-based various environmental justice groups. She has a BJ in journalism and a BA in humanities from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Next to Lindsay, we have Paige Knappenberger, who's a media relations associate with Climate Nexus. Paige writes strategic and engaging press releases, fact sheets, and other media materials for Climate Nexus and partner projects. Paige also manages and develops Climate Nexus's relationships with journalists and key media organizations. And in addition to her communication work, she keeps tabs on the impact that Climate Nexus is making in social, traditional, and online media. Prior to joining Climate Nexus, Paige worked for the DC Sustainable Energy Utility and has interned with Oceana and the NRDC, the National Resources Defense Council. Paige has completed a dual master's in sustainable development and global environmental policy through the American University in Washington and the United Nations University for Peace in Costa Rica. And Paige comes from both Arizona and California. So we have a very distinguished group of experts here that are going to help us understand more about climate communication. Our plan for the evening is after Jeff speaks, we're going to have Lindsay tell us a little bit about about Climate Nexus and about climate public relations. We're then going to break out into groups, and you have little dots on your name tags, most of you, and I'm going to explain that after they're finished speaking, but that should be around 8 o'clock when or shortly thereafter, because we're running a little bit late, and we'll have a half an hour break half an hour breakout session. We'll come back here, talk about what you learned and discovered in those breakout sessions, and then follow with a question and answer period. So I think we've all spoken enough, and you came here to listen to the experts, so we'll let you listen to them.
Well, this is an incredibly impressive crowd. It's really quite an honor to be here to speak to all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me and my colleagues. We at Yale actually work a lot with Climate Nexus, and they do a great job publicizing a lot of our work. So it's a pleasure sharing the stage with them today. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we do, why we do it, and some of our findings, and try to provide some guidance on how you talk to different kinds of people about climate. Kind of just at the beginning of learning about this, but hopefully some of what I can tell you about our findings tonight will be helpful to you in talking to your uncle who doesn't believe that climate change is happening or what have you. So let me tell you a little bit about what we do and why we do it. Let's see that. All right.
Reading missions.
Okay, I've got it. As a social marketing campaign or campaigns talking about climate change, educating the public about climate change is an extremely thorny and difficult issue. And we feel that there's definitely a need to do, there's been a lot of scientific research into climate change, but not a whole lot of social science research into how people think about climate, the environment, etc. And that's what our task really is. Now, when I used to work for Roper, GFK acquired Roper, I had the pleasure of working on a big social marketing campaign called the Meth Project that was rolled out in a number of different states. It was a very cutting-edge, high-profile campaign designed to dissuade kids from taking methamphetamine, which is a huge problem in the mountain states. And doing that kind of a program in and of itself was difficult because you have to be able to talk to rebellious teenagers in a way that they understand. But on the other hand, the issue itself isn't particularly difficult. It's very easy to show, to demonstrate that methamphetamine is an absolutely terrible drug, and you shouldn't do it, and if you do it, you can get addicted after just trying it a couple of times. Moreover, there wasn't really two sides to the issue. There wasn't really a pro-meth lobby group out there. Maybe the Mexican drug cartels, but their PR operations aren't so high. But we, it was relatively easy to cut through. Now, when it comes to climate change, first of all, the concept itself is very difficult. And for most people who aren't educated about the topic, it seems pretty far-fetched. You walk outside and you look up and you say, how is it possible that some fumes coming out of the cars are, putting carbon into the atmosphere? The sky's so big. Most people don't know that if you took your car and drove straight up, it's only about an hour by car into outer space. They just don't even know that. The other problem is that a lot of the people who have attempted, not all, but a lot of the scientists who have attempted to communicate to the public about climate change aren't great communicators. And scientists, by their very nature, have a lot of caveats to what they say. They hedge, and it's good science to do that, but it's not great for communication strategies. So we've got that difficulty. And then, of course, we're facing a very big lobby that is trying to sow confusion, saying that climate change is a fraud, or that the science isn't good, or that there's a lot of disagreement among climate scientists. So we have to battle that as well. So for all of those reasons, we at Yale have this team that are trying to figure out, how do people think about climate? How do you reach them in a way that is effective? Sorry about that. We have a number of different publications. We're constantly doing different kinds of research. A lot of what we do is survey research, polls of the American public. You can if you Google YPCCC, our website will come up, and you can download our latest reports if you're interested in finding out about public opinion and a lot of the other research that we do. Our work is a team effort. We work very closely with some great researchers down at George Mason University and have a wonderful collaboration with them. We also work with people at Cornell and at Harvard, at Stanford, and have been and are constantly actually expanding our group. So let me talk a little bit about how we try to talk about climate science. And as you know, one of the fundamental tenets of effective communication is keep it simple, Steve. And so what we've tried to do over the years is boil down our message, and we've been testing this to try to figure out exactly what do we need to convey and how do we convey it. And we've boiled it down to 5 statements, 10 words. It's real, it's us, it's bad, scientists agree, and that's a very important one. I'll get to that in a moment. And very importantly too, that there's hope. Now, I don't know if, I don't think we have time. I'm not going to go through a lot of the science here, so let me just skip ahead. to, I do want to show this to you. Many of you may know that there is a virtual consensus in the climate science community that human-caused global warming is happening. 97% of climate scientists agree. Now, based on our research, it's critical that people understand that if they're going to begin to accept the fact that it's real, that it's human-caused, and that it's bad. And we do have a lot of information that shows that if you can convince people that climate scientists agree that this is happening, then you can start to move them in the right direction. And we found that the most effective way to convey this to people is just with a simple pie chart. It does seem to work. You'll notice that the Obama administration has a pie chart. A lot of other people, environmental groups, have pie charts. It does seem to work. But that is really critical, and that is something that we're always looking at and tracking among the American public to see how we're doing on that particular issue. So let me talk a little bit about what we found. First of all, we measure every 6 months or so whether or not people think climate change is real. Currently, about 2 in 3 do, 63%. That's down from a high that when we first observed this in 2008, where about 7 in 10 people believed it was happening. Then ClimateGate, if some of you know about that, happened, and a bunch of other things that depressed that number, and it hasn't quite come back up yet since then. But by about more than a 2-to-1 margin, Americans do know that climate change is happening. Unfortunately, fewer than half know that the cause of global warming is us. Only 47%. In fact, 37%, nearly 4 in 10, think that global warming is the result of just simple natural changes in the environment. So we really want to see that number go up. We asked people how worried they are about it. Do they think it's bad? And currently only 15% of Americans are very worried about it, and only about half are somewhat or very worried about it. It's our belief that that number really needs to go up to get people motivated to act. And then this is the heartbreaker. Fewer than half, only 4 in 10 Americans know that there is a virtual consensus among climate scientists that global warming is happening. And in fact, about 1 in 3 think that there's a lot of disagreement among scientists. It's just absolutely not true. There's not a lot of disagreement. But this is a testament to the ability of the climate denier community to get their message out and to sow confusion. We definitely need to work on getting that 42%. And then finally, is there hope? We ask a question about people, what they think the likely scenario is going to be in terms of addressing global warming. And unfortunately, only 5% of Americans say that humans can reduce global warming, and we're going to do so successfully. In fact, the most common answer among 4 in 10 people is that we could reduce it, but it's unclear at this point whether we will do what's necessary. And fully 1 in 4 say humans could reduce global warming, but people aren't willing to change their behavior, so we're not going to. So at this point, the pessimists, I think, outweigh the optimists. In fact, there are very few optimists. Okay, so what I just showed you are kind of the overall trends in the American citizenry. And you all know that there's a lot of disagreement between Republicans and Democrats on this issue, but what we wanted to do was get a much finer-grained look at how people in America cluster based upon their beliefs in climate. And we found that there are about 6 groups. And this is a remarkably, it was a really successful segmentation. We did a multivariate statistical segmentation that identifies how people cluster in ways that aren't necessarily obvious just by looking at the data. And this has been a remarkably hardy segmentation, has a lot of face validity, And we've been very happy with it. And so let me just tell you a little bit about each of these groups. And this goes along a continuum from the alarmed all the way down to the dismissive. Now, the alarmed comprises 16% of the population right now. It kind of goes up and down a little bit from wave to wave. These are tend to be well-educated. I'm going to guess that the majority of the people in this room are the alarmed. They tend to be well-educated, a little bit above the median in terms of income. They're very active. They are not just talking the talk, but they're walking the walk, and they're talking to people about this, and they're very concerned. Then, and this is kind of the issue public. If we can activate these folks, give them something to do, they'll do something. Then we've got the concerned. Now, the concerned believe that global warming is happening as well. But for them, they're not really doing a lot about it, and they don't perceive it as much as a proximate threat. They think it's going to happen sometime in the future. It's not an urgent problem for them. What we think we can do with the right messaging is move people from the concerned into the alarmed, if we're smart about it. Then there's the cautious. The cautious are people who, they're not skeptics necessarily, but they're not necessarily convinced that climate change is happening. And if it is happening, they're among the groups most likely to believe that it's due to natural changes in the environment. Then there's the disengaged, and these are people who say they don't know to a lot of the questions that we ask. They're just simply, climate isn't on their radar at all. It's only about 1 in 20 Americans, but these are people who are relatively difficult to reach. They're not just disengaged on climate, but on a number of other issues as well. And about 1 in 10 Americans are what we call the doubtful. These are people who, by and large, don't think global warming is happening. Some of them do, but if they think it is happening, virtually all of them think that it's due to natural changes in the environment. They tend to be older, conservative, male. Those are the doubtful. And then finally we have the dismissive. And the dismissives are, you might characterize them as the evil twin of the alarmed. They are adamantly certain that climate change is a hoax, a plot by the UN or the Freemasons or whomever, and are quite hostile to the whole issue, and certainly don't want the government to get involved and waste their time and resources on this particular issue. Now, this is, I know that we're going to have a breakout group later where we talk about how do you communicate with different kinds of people. The dismissive, it's probably not worth spending a whole lot of time and resources trying to convince them. This is a strain that exists in the American population, has probably since the country was founded. They used to.
Did you have to do this against the voting public or just the general public?
This is the general public. We can look at it by likely voters. But these are the people who might have been the John Birchers, back 40, 50 years ago. So anyway.
For the Tea Party,
A lot of the people in the dismissives identify themselves as Tea Party, members of the Tea Party. Okay, so we've been tracking these groups, we've been looking at them every which way, and what I want to do is just share a few findings on how you might attempt to frame the discussion with some of these folks. First, let me just go through and show you how different these groups really are. The blue bars represent the number of people who think that climate change is real. The red bars are those who think it's not real. And you can see the huge difference between the alarmed and the dismissive. The doubtful are kind of split, but they do tend to believe that it's not happening. We look at how each of these groups, whether or not they think it's caused by humans or if it's caused by natural changes in the environment. The alarmed and the concerned are certainly convinced that it's a human-caused phenomenon, whereas the doubtful, as I mentioned before, overwhelmingly think if it is happening, that it's natural changes, and as do the dismissives. And the cautious, you can see too, are split on the issue. We asked people, how worried are you about global warming? Well, virtually all of the alarmed and the concerned are very worried, The cautious, not as much, or the disengaged, and then you can see that the doubtful and dismissive, they're not worried at all about it. And then we test to see if each of these groups understand that there is a virtual consensus among climate scientists. The alarmed and the concerned know this. None of the other groups, a majority of none of the other groups are aware of this fact. And in fact, among the dismissive, over half think that there's a lot of disagreement. So they've been particularly receptive to the denial community's message. All right, so how do we talk to people and not raise a red flag to people who are, don't wave a red flag like in front of a bull to people who might not be fully on board yet? Well, there are a number of different ways. Right now, one of the key things we need to do is reach out to Republicans. And there's a representative, a former representative named Bob Inglis, who many of you who follow this might know about. This guy is Mr. Conservative. He was a representative in the reddest district in the reddest state of the country, South Carolina. He represented the district that contains Bob Jones University, and no one's going to mistake this guy for a liberal. However, he did say at a town hall meeting when he was running for re-election that he thinks that global warming is happening. As a result, he was primaried, Tea Party person, won the nomination and went on. And Bob Inglis was no longer the representative. But what he's been doing since then is he has an institute down at George Mason University, and he's made it his mission to go out and talk the language that conservatives and Republicans like to hear. And his general message, he's testing this out. This has been effective, and it's great actually to have this. His perspective is, look, this thing is happening, and the Republicans have left a huge void on that side in finding solutions. And if we just leave it up to the liberals, they're going to screw up everything like they do with their big government solutions, and we can't have it. This is America. We need to, unleash the entrepreneurial spirit to solve these problems. Let the free market solve this problem. And so that's a very good way to talk the language of people who are, the alarmed typically aren't Republicans. So he's been doing some great work. And some of the work that we've seen is that you might, this slide I'm showing you right now. Global warming, as you can see, this is a list of how much of a priority Americans should make each of these particular issues, that the Congress and the President should make, how high of a priority they should make these issues. Virtually all Americans think that health care, across these 6 Americas, should be a priority. The economy, education, social security, terrorism, a lot of agreement there. Global warming, huge difference between the alarmed, 86% say it should be a higher, very high priority. There's just a lonely 3% of the dismissive state. However, energy independence is thought to should be a very high or high priority for the President and Congress, not just by the alarmed, not just by the concerned, but by about half of the cautious and 70% of the disengaged. So maybe we start talking about energy independence. That's a baby step. And by the way, even the dismissive, 2 and 3 of them think that should be a high priority, energy independence. This is very interesting too. Half or more of all groups, except for the dismissive, say they would somewhat or strongly support the following policies, all of which would help reduce global warming. Regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant, provide tax rebates for people who purchase energy-efficient vehicles or solar panels, fund more research into renewable energy sources, such as solar and wind power. 53% of the doubtful would support that. 72% of the cautious would support that. So maybe you don't use the word global warming or climate change, but using the words renewable energy, solar and wind power, those aren't dirty words to anybody except for the dismissive. So we think that that's a good point of entry to start talking about this. I'll also say that, half or more of the cautious, concerned, and alarmed support federal laws designed to increase energy efficiency and the use of renewable energy sources. And the doubtful are kind of split on the issue. A lot of them don't know, but as many are for that federal laws as are against it. So there is a lot of common ground out there. You just have to know how to talk about it. And I'm going to leave you with this last slide, which is quite fascinating. What we did in our last survey is we did a little experiment. And what we did, and this is I'm not looking at the 6 Americas now, we haven't looked at it that way, but we are looking at it in Democrats versus Republicans versus independents. And what we did is to half of the sample, we described a particular policy and asked people whether they would support it or oppose it. And that policy is to set strict carbon dioxide emission limits on existing coal-fired power plants to reduce climate change and improve public health. Power plants would have to reduce their emissions and or invest in renewable energy and energy efficiency. The cost of electricity to consumers and companies would likely increase. Okay, Democrats by a 3-to-1 margin support it. Republicans are split on it. Slightly more support it than oppose it. Independents, 60% of them, the majority, would support that policy. However, we asked the other half of the sample the exact same question, but instead what we did is we prefaced it by saying, President Obama directing the EPA to, and then the rest of the statement is the same. There you don't see the Democrats budge at all. However, the Republicans, suddenly now by a 2-to-1 margin, are opposed to the exact same policy. And the independents become split as opposed to the majority. So this is just a demonstration on how partisan this issue is, and just simply mentioning a person that people don't like will make them oppose a policy that they otherwise would have supported. So an object lesson in how important the words we use is in talking to people. The last thing I would emphasize is that if you're talking to someone who is skeptical about climate science, listen to them and be respectful. A lot of people who are on the fence about it feel that they're being disrespected. And in many cases they are. They're being told that they're anti-science, that they're stupid, this and that. It's not the way you talk to people. Try to find common ground, listen to what they have to say, and be completely respectful. And I think that just a little bit more respect, getting the conversation into the air in a constructive, positive way will be very effective. So, I'm now going to turn it over to the experts on public relations. Lindsay, thank you very much.
Can y'all hear me? Okay. Thank you, Jeff, very much, and thank you all for having us. We're really, really excited to be here. We hope that we'll try to work the delay, but we don't have tons of text on our slide, so I promise you won't be missing anything, and you'll be forced to listen to me. So you heard our bios. We did not know she was going to read the whole thing, by the way. I promise you that. But I just want to make sure you all know, although I'm the one speaking, this is a team effort. I'm Lindsay, this is Monica, Paige. We all work together at Climate Nexus. So I do want to tell you just a little bit about who we are. We began in 2011, specifically to fill what some folks in the movement identified as a communications gap around climate change. So we have to deal every day with the differences of opinion that Jeff outlined for you. So you heard me say that I work in media relations. That's one part of what we do, and that's a separate discussion, and we can talk about that offline if you want, than what I want to focus on today. Today is all about the work stream at Climate Nexus that has to do with engaging folks who are real. Folks who don't work inside the Beltway, folks who don't write for the AP. I love those people. I have to talk to them every day. But in really engaging with, reaching, and making the idea of climate change resonate with folks who stand to make a real change and a real difference. So, where are we? Okay, so who we are. Okay, so this is our one-liner. We do media relations. We do policy communications. We engage pretty robustly in some of the more detailed science things in certain aspects. We try to diffuse some of the misinformation that Jeff spoke about. And then, most pertinent to today's discussion, we try to elevate those news stories and the news storytellers. Perfect. Okay, good. So, Jeff really brought home for us, and I think we can hit one more, just how varied opinions, beliefs, attitudes, preferences are about climate change. So what Climate Nexus tries to do is match what he tells us, what he and the social science tell us about these opinions with what we know about the science, the impacts, the possible solutions, and then what we know about people in strategic messaging. So in a perfect technological world, we have prepared a video for you. It features some incredible people, including Harriet. We can't play it, and Paige was very, very kind enough to act it out, but we thought that would be a little ridiculous too. So I'm just going to describe it for you, and I know that I'm breaking the cardinal sin by telling and not showing, but basically it's a video that I think showcases the various ways that people can engage with the issue of climate change. For instance, there's a cheesemaker in it. She's from Wisconsin. She does exactly what Jeff said. She never uses the term climate change in her portion of the video, but she talks about the fact that she uses solar panels on her roof because it's cheaper for her entrepreneurial business. We have retired General Norm Sipe, who talks about the impact that climate change and warming waters are going to have on naval operations already now, and certainly looking in terms of budgetary, resource allocation, and readiness for the U.S. military. We have Harriet, a mom. And that's to say that I want to echo what Jeff suggested in that this is no longer a conversation about climate science. This is a conversation about values and how we intersect with that issue in our everyday lives. And the good news is that the science is there for us. So really quickly, I think that we all agree that you want to feel confident and you want to feel informed about the science, but that's not really our only message anymore. So I want to talk about the science, tips for communicating science first. I want to do so quickly, and I want to get it out of the way because that's not going to be our bread and butter. Okay, so don't debate it. Jeff said it, and I'll say it again. The scientific consensus is clear. It's demonstrated in when we ask experts on the field, when we content analyze the peer-reviewed research, and when we ask every single alphabet soup of an organization across the globe. And I can give you tons and tons and tons if that's helpful. The American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UK's Royal Academy of Sciences, all of them are clear and in one singular voice. Climate change exists, it's caused by human activities, it's bad, and it's going to get worse much more quickly than we anticipated. So I think what you want to do is you want to remind folks of that consensus, but don't feel like you have to stand alone and defend the climate scientists. I'm not a climate scientist, you shouldn't have to be either. Whether you're talking to your mom, your dad, your son, your daughter, your neighbor. All you have to do is remind them that that consensus exists, point them to more information, and then if you want to go a little further, maybe talk in some big trends. Keep it really big picture. Say things like, everything that we're seeing matches what the models predicted for a warmer world. Use phrases like frequency and severity. I know that you guys, more acutely than anyone else in the nation, have been asked the question, how can you attribute a single weather event to climate change? You don't have to answer that. All you have to say is all weather events now unfold against the backdrop of a warmer world. And if you think that more scientific information is what your audience needs, we can give you the resources to point them to more. But if you have to get to the point where you're debating peer-reviewed literature with someone, I think it's fair to say you might have already lost. Okay, so we've gotten through the science. We know the importance of the consensus message. So how do we combine what we know about the science with what we know about people and strategic messaging? So this sounds really, I think, trite. Know your audience. Obviously, Harriet told us that you all really wanted to know how to speak to your neighbors, your friends, the people that you are already engaged with when it comes to climate change. So I realize it sounds a little bit obvious. But for a really long time, environmental advocates weren't thoughtful about with whom they were talking, and they just kept cramming the same information down people's throats, and then they wondered why it didn't work. So when we say know your audience, what do we mean? Who they are. So obviously that's George, he's my neighbor, we've known each other 15 years, but I mean just a little bit deeper, not only their demographics, but where they are in their lives, what's important to them. So just this is a fun example, I think. So we were working with some Unitarian Universalists last year, and they were planning their annual meeting. And they were so excited to engage around the topic of climate change as a social justice issue. And these folks were just thrilled, and they were kind of recounting the glory days of the civil rights movement. And some of the elders in the church were just so excited, and they just got so ahead of themselves, and they forgot that one of their core missions of this annual meeting was to engage young parishioners. And so when we were strategically talking about climate change, we had to remind them that the civil rights movement was really different from someone when you have to learn about it from a textbook or a lecture than for the folks who were really marching next to folks. So when I say no, I just mean be conscientious of some of the factors and the differences that people are bringing to the conversation. Where they are, not only physically, but also in their lives. So my favorite example for this one is my grandfather. He is 85 years old, and with the exception of when he was in the Air Force, he has lived in the southeast Missouri, and it is in fact Missouri if you're down there. And he's lived in the Boot Heel his entire life. And so when I talk to him about climate change, when he's like, "Why did you move up there with those damn Yankees, Stinky?" When I talk to him about climate change, I talk about how spring is coming a little bit earlier than any time that he can remember. How the hottest days are a little bit hotter. How the animals that he loves to observe from his front porch, and I'll be honest, sometimes he shoots them, that they're different animals. Some of the animals that he used to see are no longer there, and animals that he used to see in northern Texas are now in Missouri. I remind him that the gardening zones had to change. And I talked to him about when he used to put broccoli in the ground and when he has to now. And so when I say where they are, I mean think about where a person experiences climate change in his or her life. When we say how they connect to the issue, I think this is the one that is difficult, but it provides the richest opportunities. So I just want to go through a couple of prompts that could get you to where they connect to an issue. One is economics. This is where the conversation is going. At least this is where we're trying to take it in the media space, and where I hope a lot of you will take it in your personal lives. I know some farmers who really consider themselves apolitical and certainly don't want to engage in the way that a lot of us do. But anytime I talk to any farmer, within 30 seconds, I'm talking about the weather. So when I talk to a farmer about climate change, I talk about how their crop insurance premiums have risen over the past 20 years. I ask them how many times they, or perhaps their neighbors, have lost their farm due to heavier concentrated downpours than we've ever seen before, and whether they had to spend extra money on pesticides or water to maintain their crop through a drought that is unprecedented. Health is another one. The social science research shows that even while people might not take care of themselves, they certainly like the idea of taking care of themselves. Many of my peers are new parents. And so when I talk to them about climate change, I make it all about, did you know that Lee Summit North can't do 2-a-days for football practice anymore? You know, I was in drill team. I remember what it was like to stand out there at 2 o'clock in the middle of Missouri and fry on an asphalt. That's only going to get more miserable. Asthma, respiratory issues, particularly in cities, are directly connected to higher temperatures. Higher nighttime temperatures are especially important, and these are affecting our quality of life both in the moment and long term in terms of morbidity and mortality. And last is that there could be a connection to someone's life that doesn't have to be literally life or death. A lot of people I know love to ski. We've already seen tons of stories about the Olympics, but also about a lot of the ski resorts out east having to make more snow. That's going to drive ticket prices up. That, frankly, the snow stinks because it's made and it's not natural. The seasons are shorter, and it's not nearly as much fun. So we can be creative about how we ask people to connect to the issue. Who they trust, in terms of knowing your audience, I think is the most difficult, because I think it is intensely personal. But I don't want to use the word use against your friends and your colleagues, but maybe maximize or leverage what you know about what they care about. So Jeff, I think, summed it up perfectly in terms of once we add the term President Obama to that question, people are just like, oh, that's ridiculous. And I know that we all have people in our lives that really don't want to know what the president or the American Medical Association or some of those alphabet soup that I suggested are important. But we work with this group called the Center for Naval Analyses, and they have a military advisory board, and it is 14 retired 3- and 4-star generals and admirals. And I would dare anybody in his or her right mind to tell the former Marine Corps commandant that climate change is a hoax when they've heard him talk about how it's going to multiply threats, it's going to exacerbate tensions worldwide, it's going to create new problems both domestically and abroad, and that it's going to affect troop readiness. So I think who they trust and what matters to them can be a really potent connection that has nothing to do with science and has everything to do with who we are and what we care about as human beings. Okay, so we've talked about knowing your audience and some frameworks that can help you do that. How do you then deliver the message? And it's true, we're still learning about this. You know, I think if we had it down, we might be further on the issue. So I want to make sure that we all know that we want to learn from you. These are just our tips of the trade, that no one has done this perfectly. But when you deliver these messages and you know your audience and you're thoughtful about it, we know from both experience and from social science research that it is more effective when it's local. We are terrible about visualizing problems that are far away. And we mean far away in space, as in the other side of the planet, but also far away in time. For a really long time, the science was really, really dire about what was going to happen in 2100, and people just could not conceptualize it. So let's try to talk about what we're observing now. Try to use what you know about your friends and your family to what we're seeing, and then connecting that to larger trends. We talked about personalizing it. You don't have to tell them everything. These don't have to be long stories. More information is not always better. I think for a long time, again, the environmental movement was just so concerned with doing all those caveats and doing all the nuances and everything. And that's not our job. That's not our job as neighbors. That's not our job as communicators and as real-world advocates. But I do think when you combine these local, personal, with what I know about a person, that it does help to put them in story form. I mean, we're hardwired as a species to love characters, to love a little bit of a narrative arc, to love a little bit of drama. And we can tell you, we hope, we can share with you that those stories are real and they do exist, and that if you can tell them and share them, we find that they have a lot more resonance. It doesn't always work. It's not even really a science, it's kind of more of a craft that we're all still learning about. We're drawing on the best data, it's out there, we're drawing on our experiences, but it also has a lot to do with luck and timing. And I think that we should all be honest about that, and that we should be forthright about what success really looks like in terms of maybe not engaging directly with those folks who aren't convincible, and maybe leveraging the best way that we can. And for some people, that might be only preventing them from cursing and exploding when I mention the climate change. Maybe that's what success looks like for some people. For other people, maybe it is moving them from the concern to the alarm, where maybe they write a letter to the editor, or maybe they talk to his or her congresswoman. So I think we all want to leave today knowing that we need to learn from each other. We need to share best practices. We need to hit them with all we've got and know that that might still not be enough in the near term. So we're going to break for a few minutes. When we return, we will talk a little bit more about how we'll use the 6 Americas and the strategic communication things and put it to practice.
Whether it be weather, which can be a little hard to explain, or just certain things like, that if you have a friend or family member that's in the farm business, see how it affects their business, how it affects their life. And probably the main thing is that our role as people is to, lay the groundwork for what people can decide. We're not here to make the doubtful people change their mind. Obviously, most of us would like that, but the thing is that we don't make the decision for them. We decide what we want to believe in, what we want to support. They believe what they want to support as well. Our job isn't to force them to switch their decision. If we come in to a conversation with someone that is doubtful, if we get them angry, then they're automatically going to dismiss us. We can't insult them saying, oh, why do you believe in this? Why do you believe in that? You're wrong. Because they might not be wrong. The thing is that we have to just show our facts, show our research, show our results, and then let them make a decision for them. And then hopefully we can get through to a lot of the people that are doubtful. They can see what is going on, and they can make a decision for themselves. And hopefully they would agree with us. But then if not, we can't just beat ourselves up because of that. It's not, everyone is going to be doubtful. In our group, we had someone that doubted some of the results that were going on. So instead of attacking that person for what they believe in, accept them, accept their beliefs, just like anyone wants to accept our beliefs as truth. We have the results, let the results speak for themselves, lay the groundwork for what you want to accomplish, and then hopefully they'll decide on their own.
Okay, we were the other doubtful group. We basically looked at, we were talking to conservative, white, older males, and we thought about how the commandant of the Marine Corps believes in global change and climate change. We also talked about how military dependence on oil has increased because the coal plants are shutting down, and we're going to be looking at higher gas prices because of that problem. Another strong thing would be to engage them in conversation and ask when was the last time you ran out of power, and how long did your power outage last? With that, you could talk about the damage that comes with storms and the costs that come with the storms. And then make sure that we always talk about climate scientists all being in agreement, because if you say scientists and people quote a different scientist, you could say, well, that's not their specialty. We're talking about climate scientists here. Then we went on to emotions and the unusual nature of a drought or any climate change can result in traumatic experiences. Also health problems, heart attacks while shoveling, Lyme disease that's moving south because of warmer climate, asthma, and mosquitoes that are coming into New Jersey that weren't normally found in New Jersey. And then you can talk about the frequency and intensity of the storms and bring it to the now, bring it to the present, and that was what we thought would be most effective.
highlight the second group. I'm so glad that you brought up independence, particularly in light of what Jeff told us about the survey research. There's a group called Operation Free, and it's a group of former military veterans who are working. They don't consider themselves climate change activists or advocates. All they want to do is lower our dependence on foreign oil so that we can lower the number of people who are exposed in convoys and hopefully make it a little bit more secure for our troops. So that's Operation Free, and they're doing some great work. So that's a great way of connecting with values without using climate change as the lead or without the end-all be-all.
Honestly, I thought it was a really smart idea to cite the military, because a lot of the outflows are traditional values, and they have great respect for the military. And you can point them to numerous reports that many of the branches of the military have issued about how they are preparing for climate change. They are certainly prepared for this happening. And that might be a great gateway. I thought that was a good idea.
All right, can we invite our cautious group, the blue and the yellow, to come? We'll have the blue report first.
You check the audio.
Check, check.
That's good. Over there we should.
Okay, so we had the cautious. What we came up with is that this is a diverse group in, it could be a middle of the road kind of people. It could be dinks, double income, no kids. It could be youth and a wide variety of youth. It could be overwhelmed mothers. It could be very religious people, but not kind of the edge of religious. And so coming up with maybe a single methodology or a way to reach them was not something that we thought was easily possible. Cautious people can be people who don't want to change the way that they live. They can be passive. They can be conflict averse, insular, maybe people who don't want to share opinions. And often with youth, it's people who don't believe that a single person can create change. So the solutions that we came up with were trying to understand their values, try to understand what is important to them, and the way that you're going to do that is you're going to try to ask them questions, but ask them questions that are non-confrontational, non-judgmental, and open-ended. Offer yourself as a resource, look for common ground, look for individual experience that you can share and that you can relate to with them. Consider morality. Think about discussing with them whether overindulgence makes them feel good and whether gluttonous behavior is a good thing or a bad thing. Talk about, this again, especially with youth, talk about the fact that everybody eats and everybody breathes and how that is going to be affected in the future. And with this group especially, be very careful not to push too hard, because if you push them too hard, they're just going to shut down and you're going to stop all communication.
Both those groups were great. I just wanted to add, I thought you hit on a really important point about how young people can be aware of the problem but feel that it's too large for them to do anything about. And I certainly believe that individual action and showing what's possible in a family situation or just individually is impactful, but I think it's also really important to expose people to figureheads in their age range and in their demographic region who are making a bigger impact. So that might be exposing them to leaders in the youth movement or celebrities who stand up for the cause. I mean, we're very cautious about working with celebrities and advocating them to be spokespeople for certain issues, but with a group like the Cautious, it could be really impactful. So just another thing to consider.
Okay, you guys covered it all.
Sounded great.
All right, so can we invite the red and the orange group, the concerned groups, to come up to the stage?
Can you hear me now? We were tasked with the idea of how to convince the concerned people to move to the alarmed people. And we decided that the best way to do that was to appeal to people on a very personal level, and there were 3 areas that would be personal to them, which would be their finances, their health, and their children. And then we came up with very specific ideas on how to deal with each of those, how to talk to them about the idea that perhaps they've noticed that their fuel bills have gone up, that their gas bills have gone up, that their kids are staying home more frequently from school, that this kind of personal thing, and the best way to do it would be to invite them to an NJPPN meeting.
We have one more concern group.
Well, we're a concerned group, and we're too busy. Life has taken over. We know it's a problem, and we really would love to do something someday, but right now we just don't have time. So with those people, you have to keep it simple. Keep it simple, like one of our members said. It's not really hard in your everyday life to make simple changes and to cut your carbon footprint in your home or your community. So I think community involvement is important. One of our recommendations is to talk to the community on the local level instead of worrying about the elected officials, who some of them don't agree with what you're doing. But if you work on the community level, you can make a difference community by community by community. And it is cumulative actions there. What I've noticed in talking to people is the words global warming do not work. You need to use climate change, because if you mention global warming, especially this winter, people turn around and say, you're crazy, it's not true, we are not warming, because they only see what they see here. So that's an important thing, and I found that to work. Then they start to agree with you, oh yeah, climate change, but global warming is bad. Also, when they tell you that it's just just natural causes, it's cyclical, it happens all the time, it's been happening for millions of years, I agree with them. There is cycles in the system, but humans are accelerating the cycle, and it's happening quicker than it should. So that's some of our recommendations. And also, I try not to spend a lot of time and energy on people that you're not going to change them. There's too many people out there that you can make a difference with, that I would spend my energy trying to work with them, and the real naysayers and the ones, just leave them, you're not going to change them right now. You have way more work to do with the people that you can change than to deal with people that you can't. Thank you. How do you know the difference? Well, you could pretty much during conversation. A lot of times you can kind of pick up on that. Or if you know the people, or you get to know them and you see what they're doing, or you can sometimes just tell just by the conversation, the arguments that you get into immediately. At least that's my experience. And I just have a question for anyone over here, maybe Jeff with your surveys. I'm curious to see down in the Jersey Shore, where we've had a lot of damage, I think a good survey, if it hasn't been done yet, maybe has. Have you ever surveyed people that lived there or that got damaged before Sandy and then after, and to see whether they changed their mind on climate change? It's just a thought, I'm just wondering.
We haven't done a survey. We didn't do a survey before Sandy, but we're about to do a very large survey of coastal areas in the tri-state region to find out if we really plumb what people think about climate, about weather, all those issues associated with that.
I'll open up to broader questions if our panel had anything to say about the comments they heard on the concern group.
I actually did want to add one. Am I on the mic? No?
Yes.
Some gentleman, I believe Pete, came up here. Yeah, Peter. And he said one really great strategy that he had used in response to your question, how do you tell who is receptive and who isn't receptive, is you can just ask them. Nicely, politely say, hey, are you open to hearing new ideas? Do you think that you might change your mind after a discussion? And they could either say no, and at which case you say, okay, or they might say yes, and in that event, you can then start talking to them and maybe make some groundwork. But I thought that was so simple, it was genius, so thank you.
The only other thing that I would add that I thought, I think this is, I might be skipping back to pre-concern though, but it came up with Sandy, is we can get around that really thorny cause issue by focusing on how the damages of extreme events. So we don't even need to talk about the causes. So for instance, we know that sea levels have risen. That's empirically true. Every inch of sea level rise put about 130 square feet additionally of Manhattan in Sandy's way. So whether or not you think that Sandy was caused by climate change, we know that the melting glaciers and the other contributions that are directly related to global warming made disasters that much worse. And I love also that you guys brought up the issue of energy security.
Climate change, not global warming.
Oh, that's right, thank you, I'm sorry.
All right, so we're going to open it up to,
Just one quick thing that would apply universally to all the groups, I think, is something that all Americans can relate to is our history in innovation and opportunity and can-do optimism. So I would encourage you all to infuse that in your conversations. This is an opportunity for America to lead on clean energy. This is an opportunity to conquer the greatest challenge of our time. This is not a time to say it's too big of a problem or who knows if it's really happening. Like, it is here, we are experiencing it, and let's rise to the occasion as we always have throughout history.